welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the staples that I will be putting in my Rakdos Commander Decks, and maybe a few other suggestions as well. So I will be honest straight away, Rakdos is not one of my favorite two-color combinations, so I don't play a lot of Rakdos decks, but from an objective perspective, again, and whenever I'm putting a two-color combination together in the Commander format, I want to be looking at what that color combination does well and what it maybe doesn't do so well. So of course, with black, you get a lot of tutors, you get a lot of card draw, lots of great stuff like that. I think we all know what black does well. Red, we get a lot of good removal, particularly artifact removal. Vandal Blast being a card that I'm going to put in any deck that has red in it, even if it's a 5-color deck, because it's the best artifact removal spell in the format. Removal in general is going to be pretty good for Rakdos, except when it comes to enchantments, right? Rakdos can't deal with enchantments very well. One of the things I don't love about that color combination, and enchantments tend to be really, really important and powerful in the format, right? That's why that particular hole in the Rakdos game is worrying for me whenever I make a Rakdos deck. If your opponent has that Rhystic Study or that Smothering Tithe on the table and you can't deal with it, they're just going to get so much value off of it. They might completely take over the game, or they might have that Rest in Peace that is completely shutting down your game and there's nothing you can do to get it off the table. It can be game ending sometimes if you can't deal with enchantments. We do have a couple of ways, so these are absolute auto includes in my opinion if you're making a Rakdos deck. Feed the Swarm, of course. 1 on a black sorcery, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You gain life equal to the permanent's mana cost. Now, of course, you can destroy a creature with this card, but that is never going to happen in my opinion if this is in my Rakdos deck, because I'm going to save it as an enchantment removal spell. It is just so much more important that way. Again, dealing with creatures is easy in Rakdos. Dealing with enchantments, you only have a few options. The options in red that you have, of course, Chaos Warp and now Wild Magic Surge as well, which will deal with any permanent. So of course, again, these cards are so important that I'm not probably going to waste them on a creature or an artifact, something that Rakdos deals with really well. I'm going to save them for something like an enchantment, because it is almost assured that at some point during a commander game, one of your opponents is going to play an enchantment that you really want to get off the table. So try not to waste these spells, right? If you draw them in your Rakdos deck, maybe you have them in your opening hand, don't throw them away right away, because there might be something that you need to answer later in the game. Save it for what really, really matters. Now, while we're talking about removal, again, that's something that Rakdos does really, really well. Of course, we got to throw Bedevil in there. This is one of the best, if not maybe the best removal spell in actual Rakdos colors in the format, I think. Black, and a red instant, destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Fantastic. Of course, you're always going to have any of those available to kill in a commander game. Again, not really difficult for a Rakdos deck to deal with any of these. However, having all of these 3 options stapled on one card at instant speed is fantastic. This has to go in your Rakdos deck. Terminate. Of course, a iconic card in really the history of Magic. You know, when this card first came out, I remember it was a big, big deal. Just a 2-mana instant to destroy a creature and it can't be regenerated. No stipulations at all. That was really something precedent setting at the time when this card came out. It really is an iconic card in the history of the game. Now, of course, by today's standards, maybe not so good. It is still really good. You know, it's funny, I don't see this card that much anymore. It was one of those cards that when people first started making commander decks, it was just an auto include. Of course, 2-mana instant speed, destroy any creatures, fantastic. I have seen it a lot less in recent years. I don't know if people have started playing it less because there is a lot of other options. For me, it's still an auto include in a Rakdos deck. Just really, really efficient creature removal. It doesn't get much better than this. However, one that I definitely have been playing a lot less is Dreadbore. Again, another card that was very iconic, I think, when it came out. Of course, kills a creature or a planeswalker for 2 mana, but does it at sorcery speed, which of course is a lot worse. Again, though, this card was a big deal when it came out because for 2 mana, being able to kill a creature or planeswalker was really, really good. I mean, it still is really good. You just don't see planeswalkers that much in Commander. When I first started playing Commander, I saw them all the time. I absolutely was putting Dreadbore in all my Commander decks. I don't really play it that much anymore. So I don't know if this is a card that people still play a lot. It is good. Removal at sorcery speed is always going to be a lot worse than at instant speed. If you're in that play group that is playing lots of Planeswalkers, you still might want to include it. And if you have this incredibly sweet looking alternate art one, you might want to include this. Man, this card looks so badass. It actually doesn't even really look like a Magic card, but I don't care. It's so sweet looking that if I had this card, I would absolutely include it in my Rakdos decks just because I love the way it looks. Another Rakdos removal spell that has become a staple for me is Corpse Explosion. 1 black and a red sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, exile a creature card from your graveyard. Corpse Explosion deals damage equal to the exiled card's power to each creature and each Planeswalker. Just recently came out New Capenna. I fell in love with this card immediately. I had it in my best cards from the set list. This can be 3 mana, destroy every creature in play, which of course is fantastic. You do have that stipulation where you have to have the creature card in your graveyard. Later in a game though, where I probably want to be casting board wipes more likely, I will probably have lots of creatures in my graveyard to choose from. And that's where this card I think gets really, really good is I have a bunch of creatures in my graveyard and I can choose the amount of damage that I want to do to each creature and each Planeswalker. So maybe I only want to do 4 damage because I got a 5 toughness creature on the battlefield and I don't want to have to lose it. So being able to choose the damage that you are dealing to your opponents, I think makes this card extra good. I like it a lot. Like I said, I don't play Rakdos that much. So for me, there's not a ton of Rakdos staples, but a few that you could definitely be throwing in your decks. Rakdos Charm is one that absolutely is a commander staple that everyone seems to play a lot and I don't. I actually have never put this in a deck before. It has been a commander staple forever. Black and a red instant. Choose 1. Exile our cards from target player's graveyard. Destroy target artifact. Each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So modal cards are always fantastic, no question, in the commander format because you never know what your opponents are going to be doing, and being prepared for several different situations is always good. Now, the reason I don't put this card in decks is, for one, destroy target artifact is like, there's so much artifact removal in Rakdos already. I probably have lots of great options there. So I don't know how often I'm going to be using that mode. It does exile target player's graveyard, which is great. I like that mode. You know, it's always good to have instant speed graveyard hate because you never know, again, what your opponents are doing. They might be wanting to recur that giant creature out of that graveyard and you can instant speed exile it in response. That is pretty good. I don't know. I'm sort of making a case for this card and at the same time trying to figure out why I don't put it in decks. People really like that last mode. Each creature deals 1 damage to its controller, although I think I've seen that happen maybe once ever in a commander game. Usually it doesn't. Of course, this affects you, so it can work good if you have a lot of opponents that are playing a lot of creatures. If your opponent had just cast that Avenger of Zendikar and got a bunch of plant tokens, it's a really nice gotcha moment there. For me, I would probably put an Abrade in my deck over Rakdos Charm. I don't know. That's just me. I can hit an artifact and also I can hit a creature with it. 2 mana instant speed, so I guess there's some similarities there. It's a great card, no question about it. I totally understand why people put it in their decks. I don't know why I never have. I'm giving it a mention here because it absolutely is a great card in a commander game. How about Mayhem Devil? Here's a card that I think you probably could put in any Rakdos deck and it will do lots of work for you. 1 black and a red, Devil 3/3. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. Now, of course, if you're in a sacrifice theme, which a lot of Rakdos decks are doing, there's a ton of support there, especially now if you're doing a sacrifice theme in Rakdos. But if you're not doing any of that at all, this is such a fantastic card that you could put it in any deck and it's going to be throwing damage around like crazy. And the reason why is because it's any player sacrificing any permanent. So for example, even a fetch land, right? If I or one of my opponents crack a fetch land, that's sacrificing a permanent. You'll get to throw 1 damage around. And of course, that happens in every commander game all the time. Someone sacrifices their Sakura Tribe Elder. They're sacrificing a permanent. I get to throw a damage around. But more importantly, those treasure tokens, again, something that we are seeing all over the place in the commander format, that is a permanent that is being sacrificed. So if anyone's playing a treasure deck, whether it be you or your opponents, every time they sacrifice one of those treasures, you get to throw a damage around. So this can be a great support card if your you're in a sacrifice theme, but it can also be sort of a counterbalance if your opponent is in a sacrifice theme, because if they're going off sacrificing all their creatures or sacrificing all their treasures, you get to shoot them with a bunch of damage. I mean, you just think about a Blood Artist, for example. Your opponent's in that Aristocrats deck, and they're going to go off sacrificing all their creatures and draining all their opponents. Well, the first creature they sacrifice, you can shoot it with your Mayhem Devil. Just a great card if you're in the theme, but also I think a reactionary card to if your opponent's in a sacrifice theme as well. Another card that's not necessarily a staple for me, but I just really love it, is Phyrexian Purge, 2 black and a red sorcery. This spell costs 3 life, more to cast for each target. Destroy any number of target creatures. Pretty fantastic. You know, it's sort of a targeted board wipe, which you really don't see much. Now, of course, you have to pay 3 life for each target, but if you think about it this way, there's 3 creatures on the board, maybe all of my opponent's commanders. I can pay 4 mana and 9 life to destroy all of my opponent's commanders. That seems pretty good. 9 life is a lot, but destroying all my opponent's commanders for 4 mana is fantastic. I really love the targeted aspect of this. Even just 4 mana, I destroy a creature and pay 3 life because my opponent has Vorinclex or something I really want to get off the table. Can be great, but this can be an absolute blowout sometimes if you have the life to pay for it. I also think Hitotsuko Consumes All is a Rakdos card that can go in any commander deck. 1 black and a red. Saga, of course. Chapter 1, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. That's a great ability. Of course, it's going to get rid of a lot of those mana rocks, but again, more importantly, hits those treasure tokens or any token, right? Destroying each non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less means you're going to get all of those tokens off the battlefield, whether it be those treasure tokens, clue tokens, saproling tokens. Any of those creature tokens are likely going to be mana value 1 or less as well, so it's a fantastic way to deal with tokens in the format. Chapter 2, exile all graveyards. Again, another fantastic graveyard hate option. Again, this is probably a card that I would put in a deck over Rakdos Charm. And then Chapter 3, you exile it and return it transformed to play under your control. And on the back, it is Vessel of the All-Consuming. A 3/3 Ogre Shaman enchantment creature has trample. When Vessel of the All-Consuming deals damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And of course, that is any kind of damage. You can just block with this if you want to. Whenever Vessel of the All-Consuming deals damage to a player, if it has dealt 10 or more damage to that player this turn, they lose the game. That seems pretty good. Now, the thing about this card is people will look at the backside and think that's what I'm sort of looking at when I put this in my Rakdos deck. But to me, the backside is just sort of an added bonus. It is just a really menacing creature that your opponent has to deal with. Basically, it's I get a removal spell out of my opponent's hand. That's what I see when I look at the backside. It is unlikely that you're actually going to get your opponent to lose the game with this card, especially being that this is an enchantment creature, so it is really easy to get off the table. For me, I'm looking at this card and I'm thinking, okay, the first 2 abilities on the front are fantastic that you're going to want in any commander game. The backside is just a really threatening creature that, again, I probably will end up just getting rid of one of my opponent's removal spells out of their hand that would likely be used on my commander instead. So even though the backside is a little bit of a removal magnet, it's also a way to get rid of removal. So I like that as well. You also could get into the situation where I might actually cause an opponent to lose the game with it, I suppose. Nevertheless, I see it as all upside. It's win-win for me. I think you could put this card in any commander deck. Let's talk about a couple of lands that I'm going to be putting in my Rakdos decks. So Canyon Slaw is a cycle of cards that I haven't talked about yet on this series. Another cycle of lands that I put in all of my decks for a number of reasons. So it is a swamp and a mountain. So already it's got those land types, which can be really important. It's going to tap for black and red. So of course it's giving me the colors that I need. Enters the battlefield, tap, not a big deal, and has cycling 2. I love this land cycle. Unfortunately, it is only in the allied color pairings. I wish they would do it in the enemy color pairings as well. Maybe someday they will. Came out in Amonkhet. I love it a lot. And the big reason why I like it so much is it has the land types. It gives me the colors I want, but I really hate drawing lands off the top late in the game, right? If I'm on like turn 8, 9, and I don't need any mana, and I draw this off the top, I can cycle it away to get something more valuable. So for me, this is going in all of my Rakdos decks. Another one that I'm probably putting in all my Rakdos decks is Rakdos Carnarium. And again, another land cycle I actually haven't talked about yet, which is the bounce land cycle, right? Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you have to return a land you control to owner's hand, but taps for a black black and a red. So not only is it a land that is tapping for 2 mana, but it is a land that is giving you exactly the colors you need. The bounce land cycle is obviously played a lot in the Commander format, sometimes incorrectly. I made a short talking about how people play turn 1 basic land, turn 2 bounce land. It's not ramp. You're probably also going to end up discarding to hand size. That's the one thing about the bounce land cycle that maybe people don't get. It's not actually ramp. Because you're picking up a land and then you probably were replaying that land on the following turn, you're ending up with the exact same amount of mana as you did before. And then on top of that, enters the battlefield tapped, so you're probably not going to be able to use that mana right away. However, I like it in decks where I'm, for one, not playing green. You know, if I don't ramp very well, and of course Rakdos doesn't ramp very well, I like this land cycle in those color combinations, the ones that don't ramp particularly well. What the bounce lands for me do is just give me an extra land drop, right? So I don't necessarily need to be ramping like crazy in a commander deck. If I'm making a land drop every turn for the first like 6 or 7 turns, I should be good. And bounce lands will do that, right? I'm going to play my bounce land and pick up a land, and what that does is ensure I have a land drop for the following turn, and also I'm not behind on mana. Again, it's not ramp, but it is keeping me at the same place that I normally would be. So that's why I like those bounce lands. A lot of other ways to get into shenanigans with the bounce lands, of course. I'm not going to get into all that, but that's the particular reason why I'm going to put it in my Rakdos decks. But that is it. That is all the staples that I will be putting in my Rakdos decks. Of course, that being black and red combination. What staples are you guys putting in your Rakdos decks? The cards for you that absolutely have to go in there every time you are putting a black and red commander deck together. Let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.